This is a type of wealth or a level of wealth that is not just for today. It's not just for your children, but it could be for your children's children's children.
Legacy, yeah.
hmm
Yeah.
How do you approach financial literacy when you're working across the possibility of 3, 4, 5+ generations in the family of understanding what this burden, responsibility, opportunity actually is?
Communication. Communication is key. And the concept of stewardship. We talk a lot with our families about stewardship. And so having the right mindset, I think, is really, really helpful. Teaching kids about money, people will often say it can be a burden, having a lot of wealth. But a lot of people don't think about that, right? If people are going kind of paycheck to paycheck, they say, how can money be a burden?
This is the Buried in Work podcast, where we share tips and interview experts to help you simplify estate planning and end-of-life tasks.
Denise McCLain is a director at Hirtle Callaghan, a $20.5 billion outsourced chief investment officer firm. She brings over 26 years of legal and financial experience working with multi-generational client families. Her specialties include family wealth transfers, philanthropy strategy, donor-advised funds, financial education across generations. She is one of the leading experts in the country, and we're very lucky to have her here today. Now, her background's at Abbott Downing, Lowry Hill, private law practice, and she's also deeply involved in Arizona's estate planning and philanthropic communities and is on the board of many charitable and educational institutions. Denise, it's great to have you.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. So let's start with your story. How did you find your way into this work? What made you want to focus on multi-generational families?
Yeah. So actually, since the time I was in 6th grade, I wanted to be a lawyer. My parents said I like to public speak, and they said, I think you could be a great lawyer. I didn't have any lawyers in my family, but I thought, okay, I'll do this. And that was sort of my path. I was a planner from the time I was a kid. So went to college, got my undergrad in accounting, still had that vision to be an attorney, and thought, well, if I know where all the pennies go, that's going to make me a better attorney. I was thinking more on the corporate side, didn't really think litigation. Anyways, get my accounting degree, go to law school, and did my first internship, and I got to do some estate planning. I sat in with an attorney who was doing some planning, and I thought, this is what I'm meant to do. The idea that I could help people at a time of need just felt like that was going to be the thing that would fill my cup and be a great career. So I did private practice estate planning for about 9 years, and then got a call from a friend of mine who was at a wealth management firm. And he said, I'd be interested in you coming and talking to us. The person had retired. And I said, well, tell me what this would be about. And the idea to be in a wealth management company, helping clients, not having to bill them for my time, that was certainly a perk, but really getting to do a deep dive with families and helping them understand with the assets that they had, how they could transfer those generation and generation and generation seamlessly as possible. Just really was exciting, and philanthropically as well, because a lot of our clients did a lot with philanthropy and still do. And so here I am 18 years later at an investment firm and loving my clients, loving the work that I do, the team that I'm with, and really feeling that on a daily basis I get to be helping people. So I'm loving it.
Is that typical for an investment firm to have someone who's focused on estate planning within their ranks, or do they typically partner outside? Because most people would bucket that. You have your attorney for estate planning, you have your investment advisors for investments, and those are very separate things.
Yeah, I think we're unique. I do think there are firms that do it, but at Hirtle Callaghan, we talk about making it personal.
Mm-hmm.
And so in order to really understand our clients' investment needs and to bring everything together, having our expertise and bringing it to the table on estate planning, I think is really integral. And they certainly recognized that from the get-go when they started the firm.
It's interesting that you say personal, and that was literally where I wanted to go with this. Philanthropy, which you mentioned, is such a personal thing. When a family says, we want to give back, how do you help them figure out what the best path is? Is that donor-advised fund, a foundation, something else? And can you even explain for listeners that might not be familiar with that? Because this is oftentimes the playground of people that have a little bit more means than other people, and they might not be familiar with what the different avenues are.
Yeah, indeed. Well, and at Hirtle Callaghan, we do work with ultra high net worth families, and so they do have really unique wealth and have the opportunity to give back. But even if folks aren't at such a grand scale, they can certainly give back, and there are a lot of different ways to do it. So you asked about donor advised funds. What I would tell people is think about how you want to give money. Okay, if you want to give it immediately, you can certainly write a check. That's okay. You can put that in the plate at church. You can give a check at a fundraiser, however you want to do it. But there are more planned ways that you can do it, and tax efficient ways too. So people can give cash to charities. That's great. They can also give stock to charities. They can give appreciated stock, and then they don't have to recognize any capital gain. So it gets to the charity at the fair market value. They're not having to pay any gain. It's a great opportunity to do a stock transfer. A donor advised fund is really an awesome thing that came out. I feel like it's 20 years or so that donor advised funds have been around. And this is a fund that is created, and you put money into this charitable, it's like a charitable bucket, really, is what it is. You put money in, or cash, or you can put stock into it as well. And then you can use that donor advised fund to then distribute the money. So you could say you want to put $100,000 into a donor advised fund. You don't necessarily know what charities you want to give it to at that time. You transfer $100,000 fair market value of stock into the donor advised fund. And 4 months later, you say, okay, I want to make a $10,000 donation. You put in a request to the fund administrator, and then they go ahead, they cut the check. You can name it whatever you want. You can call it, you can name it after your family. I've had friends that want to be anonymous in their giving, and a donor advised fund can be a good way for anonymous giving, and clients that have done that too. They've named it after like an oak tree because they said, well, if it's an oak tree, nobody's going to know what oak tree that is. They're not going to tie it back to us. They just wanted to get the dollars out to the charities. And so anonymous giving can be a benefit of a donor advised fund. But there's not a requirement that the money has to go out at any specific time. And that's also very helpful because people can put money into it down the road. It could be the next year. It could be a couple of years later. The money is invested, so it's continuing to hopefully grow. And then that's just a seamless, easy way. I want to give 10,000 here. I want to give 5,000 here. I want to give 15,000 here. And then it's just quite simplified. CPAs love it because what's taxable or what's a tax benefit to them, a charitable deduction, is a one-time charitable deduction when the money or the stock goes into the donor advised fund. So they're not having to collect receipts from all the different charities and take care of it. It's a one simple transaction.
If you compare it with a trust where there's multiple different types, we've talked about this on other episodes and on the website, revocable, irrevocable.
Right.
Is this an irrevocable donor advised fund versus revocable? Is there a difference, or can you pull money out if you wanted to and say, you know what, I don't want this fund anymore. I need the money back.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's irrevocable as far as it being a charitable transfer. Okay. So when you are setting up a donor advised fund, it is with an entity that has charitable status. So you are making the donation to that charity. Maybe it's to a community foundation. Okay. So if you're setting up a donor advised fund with a community foundation, you're making the transfer to the community foundation, and that's irrevocable as far as the gift. Now, if for some reason you wanted to change where you're having your donor advised fund to a different donor advised fund sponsor, you could do that. So money can go from one donor advised fund to a different donor advised fund, but it can't come back to you personally. You've made a commitment that it's going to go to charity, and that's where it has to go.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's interesting. We actually had a company reach out to us recently to see if our nonprofit, so Buried and Marked Charitable, could advise and help out managing some donated funds for some processes, and maybe that's something we should look into. I don't know.
Maybe so. Yeah.
Okay,
and
let's go
Hirtle
to
Callaghan, I mean, we have what we call, we have a specific fund that we advise on. So we've got a donor advised fund, but we're agnostic as well. Like, we don't just use our donor advised fund. We work with community foundations all across the country, and we partner with them as well.
It's great. All right, let's switch over to a foundation then.
Yeah.
How does that play?
Yeah. So a foundation, if you're setting up a personal foundation, a private foundation, same thing. You make a donation into the private foundation, and that doesn't have a requirement that the money all has to come out at a specific time, but at least 5% of it has to come out every single year. And so that's where we work as a team, as a financial advisor. We also work with CPAs and attorneys to make sure that we're getting the right amount calculated for our clients of how much has to be given out. I'll tell you, for most people that are setting up a private foundation, it's not about a minimum that they have to give out. It's really, they hit the minimums. They want that money to go to charity. But there's more work for a private foundation. There's this, it's a separate entity. And so it has its own tax returns that have to be filed. There's accounting and things like that have to be taken care of as a foundation. A donor advised fund, the sponsoring organization is the one that's taking care of all that paperwork. So that does make it kind of streamlined. And I'll tell you also, people who have donor advised funds, they can sometimes call them, I'm Denise McCLain. I could have the Denise McCLain Family Foundation, and it can be a donor advised fund. So you can name them anything. But foundations tend to be they tend to be more work. There's a lot more to them as far as setting them up, administering them. We work with a lot of nonprofits. Half of our work is with families, but the other half is with foundations and endowments. And that's for private foundations that families have, but it's also for educational institutions, higher education, universities. It's for cultural and arts, religious organizations. A lot of entities create up foundations, and then those are growing and growing and growing over time. So kind of different whether it's a nonprofit institution or whether it's a family foundation.
If we're looking at donor-advised funds compared to private foundations,
hmm
what are some of the advantages and challenges of one over the other? So you talked about complexity, you talked about the
Yeah.
filings, but what else do people need to consider?
I think it's figuring out who also is going to take care of things if you're gone. I mean, we're talking about passing. And so, sometimes it's a husband and wife and they set up a family foundation and it's their baby,
Mhm.
and they want to fund it. And so they put a lot of money into it. And they're thinking when they pass away that their kids are going to love the same things. And sometimes the kids do love that and love taking that on, and continuing the legacy. And other kids, that's not their priority. And so if you have a family foundation, it's a longer term commitment.
Mhm.
Although I will say we've had some clients that have had foundations and they've decided that they actually want to transfer them into donor advised funds, split the foundation sometimes. Maybe people have different views of where the money is supposed to go to or where they want it to go to. And so sometimes family dynamics can get involved. Perhaps having one family foundation doesn't work anymore and having two different donor advised funds could work. So it's a long term play. Donor advised funds can also last a long time, but it depends on the sponsoring organization's paperwork that you're setting up as far as how many generations it could last.
How long does it take you to set up one of these? If somebody walked in your office and said, I just found out I have cancer, it's going to come pretty quick, pancreatic cancer, whatnot. I want to get going. Is this something
Yeah.
you can set up in a day, or is this something you need weeks and weeks and weeks to process?
Well, I think the paperwork can be done pretty simply, in a couple of days and get the account opened. And then it's just a matter of getting assets transferred into that donor advised fund. I would say if time is of the essence, a donor advised fund is going to be a much more streamlined way to get money to into a charitable bucket than
Mhm.
setting up a family foundation.
Yeah. You mentioned the dynamics of families, and I
Mhm.
think that this is something that people don't necessarily take into account as much as they should when they consider what happens to their estate or their charitable giving. Do you have a favorite story of families that used philanthropy to bring multiple generations together that you're able to share?
Oh, I've got tons. Let me think of which one I can share.
Yeah.
Yeah, so many wonderful stories of philanthropy. So I have a client who he and his wife, I was talking about it being their baby, right? They set up this foundation and I mean, they've done so many wonderful charitable things. And they've set up scholarships with their alma maters and with their local college. They've done so many things, but they decided to set up a private family foundation and they funded that. They funded it with stock originally. He was a founder of a company and had low basis stock, so it made a lot of sense to transfer that into the foundation. He loved doing an annual report. He loved the giving process. He loved connecting with charities and giving money. His kids also really care about charities, but they didn't have as much time as he did at his stage in life. And so it was always a big concern for him is who's going to take this over? How is this going to be handled? And so with one of the children, he really started working with that child and and she's taken it on and she absolutely loves it. He is now passed. The mom is still alive, but she works with her brothers. They meet several times a year and they talk about what's important to them. They're all across the country. And so that's also interesting because mom and dad were in the Midwest and then the boys are on the West Coast. And so it's just different, right? Because it's a great thing to bring people together because it's mom and dad's vision and philanthropy runs deep in the family. But they also need to have the flexibility to give to what they care about. It's not just about mom and dad's charities anymore. It's about what they care about in their community. So that's one little story. I'm not sure if
Mhm.
that's what you were
Well, it's
thinking of,
helpful.
but
Do people generally stick within the scope, or do you see people deviate? So it's set up, we're going to focus on these specific issues, but then someone comes to them and says, I've got a really good cause that I want you to support. If you have a donor fund, if you have a foundation, are you able to deviate, or is it structured where, I'm sorry, I'd love to help, but we're just not unable to?
Yeah, donor advised fund, you can give to anything. I mean, it's different. A private foundation, you're going to have a mission statement. You could still
Mhm.
have a mission statement for your donor advised fund as far as whoever's going to take over next of what your key areas are that you care about. But with a donor advised fund, it's not necessarily locked in stone as far as what your giving categories are. And I think even with private foundations, they still have the opportunity. They've got a mission, they've got a vision, they know what they want to give to. But if something really pique their interest, they can always revise their mission statement. They can adjust that and take on a new area of philanthropy.
All right, so we have the philanthropic angle, multiple different vehicles that we can set up to help people. A lot of people think that foremost, it's the philanthropy. Other people say, no, it's about protecting taxes, your assets, or minimizing tax burdens. How do you help people balance those two things? What are the actual tax benefits? What are the other benefits that people don't necessarily think about or even know to think about?
Yeah. So tax benefits to giving to charity. If
Hmm.
people are thinking about their overall estate plan, there's two different times to think about it, right? So if somebody cares and they want to give money to a charity right now, there's an income tax deduction. Before you pass away, income tax deduction. When somebody passes away, then there's an estate tax deduction because anything that you're giving to a non-human, to a charity, is not going to be subject to estate tax. So there's kind of two different points in time that people will often plan, and then they really marry those through their estate plan. So if somebody loves giving to charity during their lifetime, they're going to get a tax deduction for that donation, an
Hmm.
income tax deduction. And so that's super, super helpful. There are AGI requirements or AGI limitations that you can't go over a certain amount of what you're earning and what you're reporting. But people can get this charitable deduction. So that's great during lifetime. When somebody passes away, there's a very high exemption right now, and that could change at the end of the year. We don't know yet. But anything that is given to a charity is not included, is not taxed for estate tax purposes. And so that's really helpful. That's a 40% tax that's hitting people currently. And in certain states, there's additional taxes as well. So people will often give during their lifetime, and then they'll probably leave a chunk of assets that they also want to give upon their passing, either to their private foundation, which will then distribute at some point,
Hmm.
to their donor advised fund, which will distribute at some point, or they'll list their charities in their estate plan that they care about in lump sums. And so that money will be distributed to them at that point as well.
If we're talking about people who are setting up these mechanisms, these vehicles, and let's shift to the ultra high net worth individuals,
Uh-huh.
multiple foundations, maybe multiple funds. This is a type of wealth or a level of wealth that is not just for today, it's not just for your children, but it could be for your children's children's children.
Legacy. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
How do you approach financial literacy when you're working across the possibility of 3, 4, 5+ generations in the family, of understanding what this burden, responsibility, opportunity actually is?
Communication. Communication is key. There's a saying, shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations, which means that generation 1 earned the wealth and created the wealth. Generation 2 enjoyed the wealth, and
Mhm.
generation 3 spends the wealth. Now, that's not a hard and fast rule. We've seen many, many successful families that have not lost the wealth or used it all by the end of the 3rd generation, but that's because of intentionality. And I think that's the key. And the concept of stewardship. We talk a lot with our families about stewardship and
Mhm.
what that means. So that way they're the stewards of their wealth during their lifetime, but it's something that they're managing properly so that it can go on to the next generation, that they can steward and go on to the next generation. And so having the right mindset, I think, is really, really helpful. Teaching kids about money, people will often say it can be a burden, having a lot of wealth. Well, a lot of people don't think about that, right? If people are going kind of paycheck to paycheck, they say, how can money be a burden? It can. It really can. For some clients, they can worry, are people interested in me, or are they interested in the fact that I've got wealth behind me and as part of my family?
Mhm.
So there's that as an emotional concern. There's a concern of, what is my purpose? If I have this wealth, I don't need to necessarily work, but what is my purpose in life? And so the wealth can help people to have fabulous jobs helping where they're not earning a lot, but the wealth behind them and their family wealth can sustain their lifestyle while those people are able to go out and to help others and really have great purpose in their life. For
Mhm.
some people, it's about participating in the family foundation, and that's their purpose, is to get to know charities and get to know what the needs are out in the community and really partner and have that be their purpose. I think a lot about financial literacy is teaching kids about the wealth and teaching that it doesn't define them. It can
Hmm.
help them flourish, but it really doesn't define who they are as people. They still need to have purpose.
It's interesting that you say teaching the kids, and you said that once or twice in your response, which I think is unbelievably important. And
Hmm.
the reason why is that if someone only learns about what they have or starts learning when they're 16, 17, 18, they've already established a core foundation of what their beliefs, what their
Yeah,
educational background is. Obviously, having, financial means behind you gives you the opportunity to give chances and choices to help you learn. You can
yeah,
go to better schools, possibly. You can
yeah.
have, tutors if needed, all the things that people expect ultra high worth net individuals, get to leverage. But when do you think it's actually appropriate? You're unique, just like everybody else. Everybody's situation is
Yeah.
different. But when is it appropriate to start sitting kids down and saying, "Hey, we have this, fantastic situation," or is it just make sure that they're focused on financial literacy, and then when they're 13, when they're 15, you start bringing in some of the other aspects of the family's, position?
Well, kids make assumptions, right? I mean, with the internet, people think, "Oh, they don't know that we've got wealth." They know they've got wealth, you know? I
Hmm.
mean, depending on where they're living, what their circumstances are, how they travel, how long they travel. I mean, there's a lot of hints that tell you if you've got wealth. The key thing, everybody's different, just like you said.
Hmm.
Every family's different, but every child is different and has their own money kind of personality, whether they're automatic spenders or savers. I mean, that's just kind of automatic in a person's makeup. But teaching them to be wise with their money, I mean, giving them some sums of money and teaching them how to spend it, and that it's not just an unlimited bucket of assets. Little tiny things. When you take your kid shopping, ask them if they brought their money, have them learn how to use money, teach them all the things. That's no different whether somebody's got wealth or whether they don't have wealth. Teaching financial literacy is really important for absolutely everybody.
Yeah.
And the way that you learn about having money is learning how to handle it and spend it appropriately. There's not a magic number for when kids learn. I think it's giving them incrementally more lessons about money as they're aging. So when they're younger, like, let them see the electricity bill. Let them see some of the bills that are being paid. Talk to them about financial concepts, how to invest, what is interest, what is debt. Debt can be a good thing if you can use it properly. I mean, there's a lot of different options for teaching, just little tidbits along the way. So that way it's not when a child is older that all of a sudden, oh, we've got wealth. No, they kind of know they have it. It's just easing them into it. Prenuptial agreements are also an interesting thing that are important to be brought up when they're younger than when kids are older. If a family has a practice of having prenuptial agreements just to safeguard what they've had and what the family has had over the years and over the generations, bringing it up as just, something that people do in the course of life is easier when you're talking to young teenagers about that than when somebody has found the love of their life and they bring the person home and they say, "Now let's talk about a prenuptial agreement." And they're thinking it has to do with the person that they brought home versus just a financial concept.
That's an interesting point. So timing does matter.
Yeah.
I remember a conversation with someone a few months ago, and they said that we're talking about financial literacy, and they're saying that they needed some money from the bank and they didn't have money or something to that extent. And their young child said, "Well, just go to the wall." And the wall was the ATM machine. They didn't understand that, like, the money that was coming out of the wall was something that they earned. It was just, you need cash, you go to the wall.
Yeah, doesn't quite work that way, huh?
No.
But a kid's perspective. So I've gone shopping. I've got 3 daughters, and at each time at each in their different ages. But when they were young, if we go shopping, they say, "Oh, I want that, Mom." I say, "Well, did you bring your money?" "Well, no, but you've got money. You've got the
Mhm.
card." Like the magic card. And I said, "Well, I'll pay for it, but then when I get home, you've got to pay me back."
Yep.
And so, is it worth the $5 that you want to spend on it?
Mhm.
Is it worth the $20 that you wanna spend? And then when we get home, as soon as I walk in the door, I say, "Okay, you owe me $5 or you owe me $20. Go get the money." And I want them to do that because I want them to understand that when when you say you're gonna do something, then you've got to pay it back. Now, I could go put it back in their piggy bank at night, and it doesn't really matter. But that process of understanding, like, yes, that's my money, and let them hold it. I mean, I know we're in a very cashless society, but there is something about holding money and having to go up if someplace accepts cash, I guess I should say, to understand about what that really costs. And then obviously when kids start getting jobs, then they start thinking about things in terms of how many hours am I having to work in order to do this. Yeah.
And that's one of the tricks that casinos figured out a long time ago is when you transfer money into chips, it's no longer money, so you
It's no
spend it
longer money.
more
Yeah,
when
it
it's
feels
just on your
different.
yep, when it's just on your phone, it's a
Yeah.
number, it's not actually money that you earned. It's
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
different. What are some of the warning signs that you've seen that families aren't aligned on their legacy goals?
I think it's important when people are thinking of their estate planning, if they want to give money to charity, I think it's helpful to most families are already going to know that the parents are charitably inclined and that they're including, charity in their estate plan. Again, communication I think is super important for families to talk about, where their assets are going to go. Maybe it's not all going to go to the kids. We've had a couple families that really their legacy, they feel like the kids have enough and they want to give additional assets to somebody, to a different charity or to different people that they want to leave in their estate plan. And communicating that is really important. We do a lot of legacy work with our families, or values work,
Hmm.
where we meet with them. We kind of work through a process to learn about what their values are, and we have them all in the same room so that they can share their values with each other. And I think that's a really helpful thing so that when people are making estate planning decisions, they're thinking about the lens of what are their values. And the kids are understanding that the parents have created their estate plan based on those values. But communication is really, really key. The reading of the will, that doesn't really happen. We
No,
wouldn't want that to just happen, right? You're chuckling because, yeah, I mean, that doesn't happen in real life. That happens in movies.
hmm
We don't want that to happen. We want people to know what mom and dad are doing.
yeah.
Maybe even when they're younger, they don't know all the dollars that are entailed, but as they get older, they should know what the plan, at least what the flow looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. And we say that people need to know where your wills, where your documents, who's
Yes.
involved. They don't necessarily have to know all the details, but you're right. You don't want to have that fictional movie experience where a lawyer is waiting in a room for the family to enter that smells of rich mahogany and leather seating. It doesn't happen. Uh,
Doesn't happen.
are you going as far to suggest that families create a written family giving policy or a value statement?
Yes, yes. We love value statements. Absolutely. It's the lens that, generationally, right? Generationally, when they do a legacy statement and all the family is part of it, and then the families are teaching their young kids, hey, this is what grandma and grandpa believe in, this is what mom and dad believe in, this is what we as a family do. We absolutely believe in having a family mission statement.
Now, for someone who is listening, who wants to leave a meaningful impact for themselves, for their family, but they don't know where to start, what do you tell them?
There's a couple different ways they can do it. So obviously estate plans are important. And that's the plan, right? I mean, so
Hmm.
talking to a professional who can actually draft your estate plan, I think is very important so that they can guide you and ask you questions and sort of fine tune what your thinking is. But I always say, like, if you go on a vacation, you think about what your destination is and then you back into how you're going to get there. You don't just say, I'm going to drive somewhere. You think, I want to go to this place. Then you figure out, should I fly? Should I go by boat? How should I get there? Same thing with estate planning. Think about what you want to give, who you want to give it to. And then you can have somebody back into, well, there's different charitable trusts. There's different things that you can do. There's different types of accounts you can set up. There's different timing that you can transfer assets. But somebody, lots of professionals can help you with that. Estate planning attorneys, financial advisors, CPAs can't draft, but they can get you. And then I think work as a team. Now, if you don't have all that put in place, I love that you're a great connector. I think
Hmm.
you're a fantastic connector to start making that happen. And I think, first of all, just getting an understanding of what you have is really important. So, an estimated net worth statement, a list of all of your assets and liabilities. I know you've talked about that before. That's really
Hmm.
important. That's a roadmap. That's a really important roadmap. And then having the titling of the accounts to be appropriately listed. That's really important because people might think that something is going to go one way, and if they don't have it titled properly, it can go a different way. So that's another important. It's a to do. You can do it on your own. Be working through those things on your own. I think I love letters of wishes.
Hmm.
You don't have to go to anybody to write your own letter of wishes. To the people that you care about, to the people that you will leave behind, that's where the family legacy statement, you can put that in. If you haven't done a family legacy statement, talk about the things that are important to you. Talk about how important a work ethic is, or curiosity, or whatever is important to you, write it down. Now, you can't give money away in your letter of wishes. That has to tie, that's your estate plan. But those are really important things that when you're gone can be really special to people, to learn about legacy.
Absolutely. All right. We have two card games. We have one that's one more story. It has 126 questions, 6 different categories. This is about, tell me a story about when you were a child, the things that you get to know on a personal level. The second one is nothing left unsaid. This is about end of life planning, estate planning, how you feel about the various aspects that come into play. Which deck do you want to play from?
Nothing. What was the second one? This
Second one
is
is
not
nothing.
about me, so I don't want not a story about me. I want to talk about what we can do to help people. So
No. We're going to ask you one question. You can pass if you want, but this is nothing left unsaid because that's what you chose, okay?
Yes.
Just randomly. Ooh, grief and support. Is there anything you'd like to talk about?
Say that one more time.
So this is from the grief and support deck.
Okay.
Is there anything you'd like to talk about? So we'll shift this up a little bit. Is there anything that we should have talked about today that we didn't? No, it's a hard question, putting you on the spot.
I know it's a hard question. Well, everybody grieves differently, right? I think when my mom passed away, my dad and I, we went to a grief group, and it was really helpful to understand that we weren't alone in how we were feeling after my mom passed away. So from a grief and support perspective, I think talking to people, you have a funeral and everybody comes and they care about you, and then they go on to their daily lives and you're still the one that's left behind. And grieving is different for absolutely everybody. I think writing obituaries can be cathartic and can be helpful. You get to really honor somebody when you're writing their obituary. Maybe that's a process that you do when the person's still alive so that you can interview them, understand what, all the different cool things that they did in their life that you can share with everybody else. But that could be a cathartic and a very helpful thing as you're working through your immediate grief is that. And then every now and then kind of rereading that and thinking about what an amazing person has now left.
Yeah.
But yeah.
All right. Well, Denise McCLain, director, Hirtle Callaghan, thank you so much for joining us today. If people want to find you, how do they do that?
Absolutely. Our website is www.hirtlecallaghan.com. CALLAGHAN is the Callaghan part. And they can certainly email me at dmcclain@hirtle.com, HIRTLE.com. That's the shortened version that makes it easier for folks.
All right. Denise, it's been a pleasure today. Thanks for sharing with us.
This has been fun. Good luck, everybody.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Buried in Work podcast. Remember, you can save 10% on our estate preparation package and games with code podcast10 at 𝙤𝙤𝙯@buriedinwork.com.